The humid Orlando summer of 2005 had been merciless, but 22-year-old Rebecca Carter never missed her morning runs around Lake Eola Park. A promising track athlete who had just secured a minor athletics scholarship to a local university, she was determined to prove herself worthy of bigger opportunities. Her mother, Diana, watched from their apartment window each dawn as Rebecca disappeared into the purple twilight, her silhouette swallowed by the joggers' trail that circled the downtown lake. On the morning of June 14th, Rebecca left as usual at 5:30, wearing her signature coral running tank and black shorts. She carried nothing except her house keys, tied to her shoelace, and a small water bottle. Diana fell back asleep, expecting to hear the front door open within the hour. But Rebecca never came home. The initial missing person report was filed by noon when Diana frantically called the Orlando Police Department. Officers searched Lake Eola Park thoroughly, questioning early morning regulars, examining security footage from nearby buildings, and dragging portions of the lake itself. They found nothing. No clothing, no signs of struggle, no witnesses who remembered seeing the young woman that morning. Rebecca Carter had simply vanished into the Florida heat. The case generated brief local media attention, a few newspaper articles about the missing athlete, community vigils held at the lake, and desperate pleas from Diana on the evening news. But as weeks turned into months, with no leads, no body, and no evidence of foul play, the story faded from public consciousness. The official theory settled into uncomfortable speculation. Perhaps Rebecca had run away, started a new life elsewhere, or tragically ended her own life in a location yet to be discovered. Diana refused to accept these explanations. Her daughter had been happy, focused on her athletic goals, excited about university. Something terrible had happened, and Diana spent the next 4 years searching for answers that seemed to dissolve like morning mist over Lake Eola. She posted flyers throughout Orlando neighborhoods, hired a private investigator who drained her savings but discovered nothing substantial, and walked the lake trail herself every single day, hoping for some sign, some clue that everyone else had missed. By 2009, Diana had become a ghost herself, hollow-eyed and exhausted, existing in the painful space between hope and despair. Then, in March of that year, during routine maintenance work on the lake's iconic fountain, a city worker named Thomas made a disturbing discovery wedged between the fountain's underwater support beams. Thomas Grayson had worked for Orlando Parks and Recreation for 17 years, performing maintenance on Lake Eola's famous fountain system. The iconic structure required constant attention, its underwater pumps and support mechanisms vulnerable to Florida's aggressive humidity and the lake's murky depths. On that particular March morning, Thomas suited up in his diving gear to inspect the fountain's base, a quarterly task he had performed countless times. The water was darker than usual, stirred up by recent storms, and visibility dropped to mere feet as he descended. His waterproof flashlight cut through the green-brown haze, illuminating rusted metal beams and clusters of algae-covered concrete. Thomas worked methodically, checking bolts and seals, clearing debris that accumulated around the mechanical components. Then, his light caught something unusual, wedged between two support beams, an object that clearly did not belong to the fountain's infrastructure. At first glance, it appeared to be a small metal box, approximately 8 inches square, heavily corroded by years of submersion. Thomas carefully extracted it from its hiding place, noticing how deliberately it had been positioned, pushed deep into a narrow space where routine inspections might never reach it. The weight surprised him as he brought it to the surface. Back on his maintenance boat, Thomas examined his discovery more carefully. Despite the rust and layers of grime, he could make out that this was actually a small locker, the kind athletes might use at a gym, with a combination lock mechanism that had long since seized up from water damage. Something rattled inside when he shook it gently. His first instinct was to force it open immediately, but years of protocol training stopped him. This felt wrong, felt significant in a way he could not quite articulate. Instead, Thomas reported the discovery to his supervisor, who contacted the Orlando Police Department. By afternoon, Detective Maria Vasquez stood in the evidence room, examining the corroded locker with growing unease. The item had been photographed, documented, and carefully opened by technicians using specialized tools. Inside, wrapped in what had once been a waterproof bag that had failed over time, they found several items that had survived their underwater imprisonment with varying degrees of degradation. A driver's license, though water-damaged and barely legible, showed enough information to make identification possible. The photograph was bleached and distorted, but the name remained just clear enough to read: Rebecca Carter. Also inside the locker were a thin gold chain with a small cross pendant, several photographs too damaged to make out clearly, and most disturbingly, a folded piece of paper that had somehow maintained partial legibility thanks to being wrapped in multiple layers of plastic. The visible fragments of text suggested this was a note, written in careful handwriting, but the message itself was incomplete. Crucial words dissolved by time and water. Detective Vasquez immediately pulled the cold case file for Rebecca Carter. Reading through the investigation notes from 4 years prior, she felt the familiar frustration that came with cases that had gone cold without resolution. The young woman had simply vanished during a morning run, leaving behind a grieving mother and no concrete leads. Now, this locker raised more questions than it answered. Why would Rebecca's personal items be hidden at the bottom of Lake Eola's fountain? Had she placed them there herself before disappearing? Or had someone else hidden these belongings after something terrible had happened? The detective's next call was to Diana Carter, a conversation she dreaded but knew was necessary. Diana Carter had aged decades in the 4 years since Rebecca vanished. Her once vibrant auburn hair had turned predominantly gray, and deep lines etched her face from countless sleepless nights. She worked part-time at a downtown Orlando bookstore, barely making ends meet after exhausting her savings on private investigators and search efforts. When Detective Vasquez called requesting an urgent meeting, Diana's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped her phone. She arrived at the Orlando Police Department within 30 minutes, her heart alternating between desperate hope and paralyzing fear. Detective Vasquez led her to a private interview room where the recovered items lay carefully arranged on a clean white cloth. Diana gasped the moment she saw the gold chain with the cross pendant. Her knees buckled, and the detective quickly guided her into a chair. That necklace had belonged to Diana's own mother, passed down through 3 generations before Diana gave it to Rebecca on her 18th birthday. Rebecca never took it off, wearing it during every run, every training session, treating it like a talisman of protection. The driver's license, though damaged, was unmistakably Rebecca's. Diana traced her daughter's faded photograph with trembling fingers, tears streaming down her face as memories flooded back. Detective Vasquez gave her time to compose herself before explaining where the items had been found. Hidden underwater at Lake Eola's fountain for potentially 4 years, concealed in a location requiring deliberate effort to access. This was no accident, no random disposal of belongings. Someone had carefully placed that locker there, someone who knew the fountain structure well enough to hide evidence where it might never be discovered. Diana struggled to comprehend this information. Rebecca disappeared during her morning run around the lake, but why would her belongings end up hidden in the fountain? The detective showed her the partially legible note, its ink-smeared words barely readable. Diana leaned closer, squinting at the fragments of text that remained visible. The handwriting was unmistakably Rebecca's, that distinctive looping cursive she had developed in high school. But the message itself was heartbreaking in its incompleteness. Only scattered words remained legible. Help, scared, cannot, watching, and most chilling, Sorry, Mom. Diana's breath caught in her throat. Rebecca had written this note knowing she was in danger, somehow managing to leave behind this desperate message. But when? And how did it end up in that underwater location? Detective Vasquez explained her theory carefully. Rebecca might have hidden these items herself, perhaps sensing danger and wanting to leave evidence behind. Or someone else could have concealed them after something terrible happened, attempting to eliminate traces of the crime. Either scenario pointed toward foul play, completely contradicting the original investigation's conclusion that Rebecca had simply disappeared voluntarily or drowned accidentally. Diana wiped her tears, her expression hardening with renewed determination. 4 years of grief and uncertainty suddenly crystallized into focused anger. Someone had taken her daughter, and that person had tried to hide the evidence. Now, finally, they had a starting point for a real investigation. Detective Vasquez assembled a small task force to re-examine Rebecca Carter's disappearance with fresh eyes and this shocking new evidence. She recruited Detective James Richardson, a veteran investigator known for his meticulous attention to detail, and Officer Sarah Chen, a young analyst with exceptional skills in digital forensics. Their first step involved reviewing all security camera footage from June 2005, the month Rebecca vanished. Downtown Orlando had fewer surveillance cameras in 2005 compared to 2009, but Lake Eola Park and its surrounding buildings still maintained some coverage. The original investigation had reviewed this footage 4 years earlier, finding nothing suspicious. But now, armed with knowledge that Rebecca's belongings had been deliberately hidden, they searched for details previously overlooked. Officer Chen worked through dozens of hours of grainy footage, marking timestamps and creating detailed logs of every person who appeared near the lake on the morning of June 14, 2005. The cameras captured the usual early morning activity: joggers circling the lake trail, homeless individuals sleeping on benches, maintenance workers beginning their daily routines. Rebecca herself appeared on camera at 5:37 in the morning, clearly visible in her coral tank top and black shorts. She stretched near the park's entrance, adjusted her shoelace, then began running counterclockwise around the lake trail. The camera tracked her for approximately 2 minutes before she moved out of frame. That was the last verified sighting of Rebecca Carter, alive. But Officer Chen noticed something peculiar. There was a gap in the footage from the camera that covered the fountain area, a 23-minute period where the recording simply stopped, showing only a blue screen before resuming. The timestamp indicated this gap occurred between 6:05 and 6:28 that morning. Detective Richardson contacted the security company that had maintained the system in 2005, requesting information about that specific malfunction. After considerable searching through archived maintenance records, a technician found a work order from June 15, 2005, 1 day after Rebecca disappeared. The camera had been reported as malfunctioning and was repaired that afternoon. The cause was listed as power disruption, likely due to moisture exposure. This seemed plausible given Orlando's humid climate and the camera's proximity to the lake. However, Detective Vasquez found the timing deeply suspicious. Rebecca vanished during her morning run, and the fountain camera malfunctioned during the precise window when something could have happened to her. Was this coincidence, or had someone deliberately disabled that camera? Detective Richardson began investigating who had access to the park's security system in 2005, compiling a list of maintenance personnel, security contractors, and city employees with technical knowledge. Detective Richardson spent 3 days buried in administrative archives, reviewing personnel files and maintenance schedules from 2005. The Orlando Parks and Recreation Department maintained meticulous records, which proved both helpful and overwhelming. Dozens of employees had worked at Lake Eola Park during that period, from groundskeepers to fountain technicians to security personnel. One name appeared repeatedly in the maintenance logs: Vincent Hayes, a fountain maintenance specialist who had worked for the city from 2003 to 2006. Hayes had been responsible for the fountain's mechanical systems, conducting regular inspections and repairs. His work schedule showed he was on duty the day Rebecca disappeared, assigned to perform routine maintenance on the fountain's underwater pumps. Richardson flagged Hayes as a person of interest and began digging deeper into his background. Vincent Hayes had left his position with Orlando Parks and Recreation in late 2006, citing personal reasons. His employment file contained nothing alarming: satisfactory performance reviews, no disciplinary actions, no complaints from supervisors or colleagues. He had been a quiet, reliable employee who kept to himself and performed his duties competently. But when Richardson attempted to locate Hayes's current whereabouts, he hit an unsettling wall. Hayes's last known address was an apartment in East Orlando that he had vacated in 2007. His driver's license had expired and never been renewed. He had no current employment records, no recent tax filings, no active social media presence. For all practical purposes, Vincent Hayes had disappeared. Richardson shared this information with the task force during their evening briefing. Detective Vasquez found it deeply troubling that the man who had been working at the fountain the day Rebecca vanished had himself vanished shortly afterward. This could not be coincidence. Officer Chen took on the challenge of tracking Hayes through alternative methods, searching for credit card transactions, utility bills, vehicle registrations, anything that might indicate where he had gone. Meanwhile, Richardson interviewed Hayes's former colleagues, hoping someone might remember details that could prove significant. One retired Parks employee, Gerald Morrison, recalled Vincent Hayes with unexpected clarity. They had worked together for nearly 3 years, often taking lunch breaks at the same picnic table near the lake. Morrison described Hayes as intensely private, rarely discussing his personal life beyond superficial pleasantries. But Morrison remembered one detail that suddenly seemed relevant. Hayes had been obsessed with swimming and athletics, particularly women's competitive swimming. He collected magazines featuring Olympic swimmers, watched televised swimming competitions religiously, and often commented on female athletes with what Morrison described as uncomfortable enthusiasm. This disturbing revelation added a new dimension to Hayes's profile, transforming him from a routine maintenance worker into a potential suspect, with both opportunity and a concerning fixation that aligned with Rebecca's athletic background. While Richardson pursued the Vincent Hayes angle, Detective Vasquez returned to the original investigation files, searching for witness statements that might now carry greater significance. Most neighbors and regular park visitors had provided little useful information 4 years earlier, simply confirming they had not seen Rebecca that morning or noticed anything unusual. But one statement caught Vasquez's attention: a brief interview with Marcus Bennett, a man who lived in an apartment building overlooking Lake Eola Park. In 2005, Bennett had mentioned seeing maintenance activity near the fountain early on the morning Rebecca disappeared, but he could not provide specific details, and the investigating officers had not pursued this lead further. Vasquez decided to locate Bennett and conduct a follow-up interview. She found him still living in the same apartment, now working remotely as a software developer. Bennett, a methodical man in his late 30s, invited Vasquez into his home and listened carefully as she explained the new developments in Rebecca Carter's case. When asked about that June morning 4 years ago, Bennett closed his eyes, clearly trying to recall specific details from a memory that had faded with time. He explained that he typically woke early and enjoyed his coffee on the balcony while watching the sunrise over the lake. On the morning in question, he had noticed a maintenance boat near the fountain earlier than usual, perhaps around 6 in the morning. This stood out because fountain maintenance typically occurred later in the day to avoid disturbing early morning park visitors. Bennett remembered seeing one person working on the fountain, though from his 5th-floor vantage point, he could not identify specific features. The worker wore what appeared to be standard Parks department attire and seemed to be conducting routine tasks. The boat remained near the fountain for perhaps 15 or 20 minutes before departing. Vasquez asked if Bennett had noticed anything else unusual that morning. Other people near the fountain, vehicles in the parking areas, anything that seemed out of place. Bennett thought carefully, then mentioned something he had forgotten to include in his original statement. After the maintenance boat left, he had seen a jogger, a woman in bright clothing, running along the fountainside section of the trail. She appeared to pause near the water's edge, possibly adjusting her shoe or catching her breath. Bennett could not see clearly what happened next because he had gone inside to refill his coffee. When he returned to the balcony minutes later, the jogger was gone. Vasquez felt her pulse quicken. The time frame Bennett described aligned with Rebecca's run and the security camera gap. The bright coral tank top Rebecca wore would have been highly visible from Bennett's elevated position. Could he have witnessed something significant without realizing it? She pressed Bennett for more details about the jogger's behavior, any indication of distress or interaction with another person. Bennett apologized, explaining that from his distance and angle, he could only see general movements, not specific actions or facial expressions. However, he added one more detail that sent chills through Vasquez. After the jogger disappeared from view, he thought he heard a brief, sharp sound, possibly a scream or shout, but it was so quick and distant that he had dismissed it as children playing or birds calling. Officer Chen had been working tirelessly on the waterlogged note recovered from the locker, using advanced imaging technology unavailable during the original investigation. By applying specialized ultraviolet and infrared scanning techniques, she managed to reveal text that had been invisible to the naked eye. The complete message sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Rebecca's note, written in her distinctive handwriting, read, "If you find this, I'm in danger. Man from maintenance watching me every morning. Tried to talk to me yesterday. Something wrong about him. Scared to run alone but can't stop training. Please help. Cannot tell if I'm being paranoid. Mom, if something happens, I'm sorry. I love you. Look for the green boat." The words crystallized months of disturbing behavior that Rebecca had noticed, but apparently felt uncertain about reporting. The green boat reference immediately drew attention, green being the distinctive color of Orlando parks and recreation maintenance vessels in 2005. Rebecca had deliberately left clues pointing toward a Parks Department employee. Detective Vasquez convened an emergency meeting with her task force. The evidence was coalescing into a disturbing pattern. Vincent Hayes, the maintenance specialist with an obsessive interest in female swimmers, had been working near the fountain the morning Rebecca vanished. A witness had observed a maintenance boat at an unusual early hour. The security camera covering the fountain area had mysteriously malfunctioned during the critical time window, and Rebecca herself had identified a threatening maintenance worker in a note she hid, presumably sensing imminent danger. The team now faced the challenge of locating Vincent Hayes, a man who had effectively erased himself from public records 3 years ago. Officer Chen expanded her digital search, looking for any electronic footprint Hayes might have left. She checked airline records, border crossings, hospital admissions, arrest records, anything that might indicate where he had gone. Detective Richardson took a different approach, investigating Hayes's family connections. Hayes's employment file listed an emergency contact, a sister named Patricia Hayes Drummond, living in Tampa. Richardson drove to Tampa the next morning, hoping Patricia might provide information about her brother's whereabouts. Patricia, a schoolteacher in her early 40s, greeted Richardson with obvious anxiety when he identified himself as a detective investigating her brother. She invited him into her modest home, her hands visibly shaking as she offered him coffee. Patricia explained that she had not spoken to Vincent in over 2 years. Their relationship strained by circumstances she initially seemed reluctant to discuss. Richardson gently explained the nature of his investigation, describing Rebecca Carter's disappearance and the evidence pointing toward Vincent's potential involvement. Patricia's face crumbled, tears streaming as she revealed information that confirmed Richardson's worst suspicions. Vincent had always been troubled, she admitted, particularly in his relationships with women. He had never successfully maintained a romantic relationship, becoming fixated on women who showed no interest in him. Patricia had tried to help him seek therapy, but Vincent refused, insisting nothing was wrong with his behavior. In 2006, Patricia received a disturbing phone call from Vincent, rambling and incoherent, mentioning something about mistakes and things going wrong. He had refused to explain further, telling Patricia she was better off not knowing details. That was the last time they spoke. Patricia provided Richardson with old photographs of Vincent and copies of letters he had sent her years earlier, anything that might help locate him now. Armed with Patricia's information, Detective Richardson returned to Orlando with renewed focus. She had mentioned that Vincent owned a small workshop space in an industrial area south of downtown, a place where he worked on personal projects and stored equipment. Patricia believed he had maintained that workshop even after leaving his city employment, using it as a private retreat. Richardson obtained the address and coordinated with Detective Vasquez to investigate the location. The workshop was situated in a deteriorating commercial complex that had seen better days, surrounded by auto repair shops and small manufacturing businesses. The unit Vincent Hayes rented was at the end of a row, somewhat isolated from neighboring spaces. When detectives arrived with a search warrant, they found the roll-up door secured with a heavy padlock. The property manager, when contacted, confirmed that Hayes had rented the space from 2003 through 2007, always paying cash for 6-month periods in advance. The rent had stopped in late 2007, but the landlord had never bothered clearing out the unit, simply padlocking it and forgetting about it among dozens of other properties. Bolt cutters made quick work of the lock. As the door rolled upward with a grinding screech, the detectives were greeted by musty air and darkness. Richardson switched on a powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom to reveal a space that immediately set off alarm bells. The workshop was obsessively organized. Every tool hung precisely on marked pegboards, storage containers labeled and stacked with military precision. But it was the walls that captured everyone's attention. Newspaper clippings, photographs, and printed articles covered nearly every vertical surface, all featuring female athletes, particularly swimmers. Most were innocuous public images from sporting events and media coverage, but the sheer volume and meticulous arrangement suggested an unhealthy obsession. Detective Vasquez moved deeper into the workshop, her flashlight revealing a workbench cluttered with electronic equipment, old security system components, circuit boards, wiring diagrams, and testing devices. Hayes had clearly possessed technical knowledge that would have allowed him to manipulate surveillance cameras. In a corner of the workshop, hidden beneath a tarp, they found diving equipment, a wetsuit, tanks, regulators, and underwater lights. Orlando's warm climate and numerous lakes made diving a popular hobby, but combined with Hayes's other characteristics, this equipment took on sinister implications. Officer Chen, who had accompanied the search team, began photographing everything systematically. As she worked her way around the perimeter, she noticed a metal filing cabinet pushed against the back wall. The drawers were locked, but the decades-old cabinet surrendered to a pry bar with minimal resistance. The top drawer contained maintenance logs and work schedules from Hayes's employment with the Parks Department, nothing immediately suspicious. But the second drawer revealed something that made Chen call the detectives over urgently. Inside were dozens of photographs, not professional media images, but personal surveillance photographs taken with a telephoto lens. The subjects were women exercising in various Orlando parks and athletic facilities, captured without their knowledge during workouts and training sessions. Chen flipped through the images with growing horror, documenting what was clearly years of stalking behavior. And then she found them. Photographs of Rebecca Carter, running around Lake Eola Park, stretching near the fountain, drinking from her water bottle. The images were dated, spanning several months leading up to June 2005, including photographs taken the week she disappeared. The discovery at Vincent Hayes' workshop transformed the investigation into a full-scale manhunt. The photographs provided irrefutable evidence that Hayes had been stalking Rebecca Carter in the months before her disappearance, establishing both obsession and premeditation. Detective Vasquez coordinated with federal authorities, issuing a nationwide alert for Hayes and adding him to the FBI's wanted list. His photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country, accompanied by warnings that he should be considered dangerous. But the trail remained frustratingly cold. Despite extensive efforts, no one had reported seeing Vincent Hayes in over 2 years. His last confirmed sighting was in early 2007, when a former co-worker had spotted him at a gas station in Daytona Beach, about an hour's drive from Orlando. Hayes had appeared anxious and disheveled, cutting the conversation short and leaving quickly. Diana Carter, informed of these developments, experienced a complex storm of emotions. The confirmation that her daughter had been targeted and stalked reopened wounds that had never truly healed, but it also validated her long-held belief that Rebecca had not simply vanished voluntarily. Someone had taken her daughter, and now they finally knew who. The question that tormented Diana every waking moment was whether Rebecca was still alive. 4 years had passed since that June morning. Could her daughter have survived whatever Hayes had done? Or had the worst already happened? With Rebecca's remains hidden somewhere they might never be found. Detective Vasquez tried to prepare Diana for difficult possibilities while maintaining hope that answers would eventually emerge. Meanwhile, Officer Chen continued analyzing the evidence from Hayes' workshop, searching for any clue about where he might have gone or what he had done with Rebecca. The maintenance logs revealed that Hayes had access to numerous city facilities beyond Lake Eola Park, including water treatment plants, drainage systems, and remote park service buildings scattered throughout Orange County. Chen began mapping these locations, prioritizing those that offered isolation and privacy. Detective Richardson took a different approach, investigating whether Hayes might have had accomplices or associates who could provide information. Interviews with former co-workers revealed that Hayes had occasionally mentioned a friend who shared his interest in diving, someone he met through an online forum. But Hayes had never provided a name, and tracking down members of a defunct internet community from 4 years earlier proved nearly impossible. As weeks passed with no breakthrough, the investigation team felt the weight of frustration. They had identified the prime suspect, compiled overwhelming evidence of his stalking behavior and opportunity, but Vincent Hayes remained a ghost. Then, in early May 2009, a park ranger in the Ocala National Forest, about 70 miles north of Orlando, made a discovery that reignited the investigation with terrible urgency. Ranger David Sullivan had been patrolling a remote section of the Ocala National Forest, checking on illegal camping activity reported by hikers. The forest, sprawling across hundreds of thousands of acres, contained countless secluded areas where people could disappear from civilization completely. Sullivan followed a barely visible trail leading away from established paths, looking for signs of recent human presence. What he found was an abandoned campsite, clearly unused for some time, but bearing evidence of extended occupation. A faded tent, empty water containers, and scattered supplies suggested someone had lived here for weeks, or possibly months, before departing or abandoning the location. Sullivan documented the scene and prepared to mark it for cleanup crews when something caught his eye: a partially buried metal box beneath the collapsed tent. He carefully extracted the container, noting its similarity to waterproof cases used by campers to protect valuables from moisture. Inside the box, Sullivan found identification documents that made him immediately radio for backup. The items belonged to Vincent Hayes, including an expired driver's license, credit cards, and what appeared to be journal entries written on water-stained paper. When Orlando detectives arrived at the forest campsite the following day, they meticulously processed the scene. The journal entries painted a disturbing picture of Hayes's mental state following Rebecca Carter's disappearance. His writings were rambling and disjointed, alternating between expressions of regret, justifications for unspecified actions, and paranoid concerns about being discovered. One entry, dated August 2006, more than a year after Rebecca vanished, included a chilling passage. She was so perfect, so dedicated to her training. I only wanted to help her reach her potential, to protect her from those who didn't understand. But she fought so hard, wouldn't listen, wouldn't see that I was offering her something better. Everything went wrong. I never meant for it to end that way. Detective Vasquez read these words with a sinking heart, their implication tragically clear. The phrase "end that way" suggested Rebecca had not survived her encounter with Hayes. But where was her body? The journal provided no specific location, no confession that could lead them to Rebecca's remains. Another entry from November 2006 mentioned, "The lake kept my secret, but guilt is drowning me anyway." This cryptic reference to a lake might mean Lake Eola, where Rebecca's belongings had been hidden, or it could refer to one of Central Florida's countless other lakes. The final journal entry, dated January 2007, was the most disturbing. "I can't run anymore. The water calls to me the same way it called to her. Maybe that's where I belong now, down in the dark, where no one asks questions and everything is quiet. I'm so tired." After this entry, the journal ended abruptly. The campsite showed no signs of violence or struggle, simply abandonment. Hayes had left his identification behind, an act suggesting he no longer intended to use it. Had he harmed himself? Disappeared into the wilderness? Assumed a new identity? The forest held no immediate answers. The journal's repeated references to water and lakes prompted Detective Vasquez to organize a comprehensive underwater search operation. Given Hayes's diving expertise and his cryptic comments about the lake keeping secrets, she theorized that Rebecca's remains might have been concealed underwater, weighted and submerged in a location Hayes could access easily. Lake Eola remained the primary focus, despite having been searched during the initial investigation. 4 years ago, those searches had been relatively superficial, focusing on areas where a drowning victim might naturally drift. Now, armed with knowledge of Hayes's involvement and technical diving skills, the team planned a systematic search of the lake's entire bottom, paying particular attention to areas near the fountain and underwater structures where weights could be secured. The Orlando Police Department partnered with the Orange County Sheriff's Office dive team to conduct the operation. Divers worked in shifts over 3 days, using underwater metal detectors and sonar equipment to identify anomalies on the lake bottom. The search was complicated by decades of accumulated debris, abandoned shopping carts, bicycles, and countless pieces of metal that generated false positives. On the second day, a diver named Michael Torres detected a significant metal signature near one of the fountain's original support pilings, a structure from the 1912 fountain that remained beneath the current installation. Torres descended to investigate, his underwater light penetrating the murky water to reveal something wrapped in chains and secured to the old concrete piling. His voice came through the radio with controlled tension, informing the surface team that he had found what appeared to be human remains. The recovery operation took hours, conducted with careful attention to preserving evidence. When the remains were finally brought to the surface, enclosed in what had once been a canvas tarp weighed down with dive weights and chains, the dive team maintained respectful silence. Detective Vasquez stood on the edge of the police boat, her expression grim as the medical examiner's team took custody of the discovery. Preliminary examination indicated the remains were of a young female, approximately the right age and height to be Rebecca Carter. Dental records and DNA analysis would provide definitive identification, but in her heart, Vasquez already knew what they had found. Diana Carter received the news that evening in the presence of Detective Vasquez and a victim services counselor. The confirmation she had both desperately wanted and desperately dreaded had finally arrived. Her daughter was dead, had been dead for 4 years, hidden beneath the lake where she had trained every morning. Diana's grief was overwhelming, but beneath the tears lay a steely determination to see justice served. She wanted Vincent Hayes found and held accountable for stealing her daughter's life and her future. The medical examiner's report, completed over the following days, revealed that Rebecca had died from asphyxiation, likely drowned, though additional trauma to her skull suggested she had been struck before being submerged. The evidence painted a horrifying picture. Hayes had likely attacked Rebecca near the fountain during her morning run, perhaps attempting to abduct her, striking her when she resisted, then using his diving equipment to conceal her body underwater, where it might never be found. Only the discovery of her belongings 4 years later, hidden in a location Hayes had chosen to preserve them, had finally exposed the truth. The confirmation of Rebecca Carter's death and the overwhelming evidence against Vincent Hayes shifted the investigation into its final phase. Federal authorities intensified the manhunt, but Hayes remained elusive, his trail ending at that abandoned campsite in Ocala National Forest. Months passed with no new leads, the case settling into a frustrating limbo. Then, in September 2009, 3 months after Rebecca's remains were recovered, a fisherman discovered a body washed ashore on Mosquito Lagoon, a coastal estuary north of Cape Canaveral. The remains had been in the water for an extended period, making immediate identification difficult. Dental records eventually confirmed what investigators had suspected. Vincent Hayes had apparently ended his own life, drowning in the same manner he had killed Rebecca Carter. The medical examiner estimated Hayes had been in the water approximately 2 years, meaning he had likely died sometime in 2007, shortly after writing his final journal entry. His death had preceded the discovery of Rebecca's belongings by over a year, meaning Hayes never knew his crime had been exposed. This timing meant Hayes would never face trial, never be held publicly accountable in a courtroom, never be forced to answer for what he had done. For Diana Carter, this created a bittersweet resolution. Her daughter's killer was dead, unable to hurt anyone else, but she would never hear a full confession, never understand exactly why Hayes had fixated on Rebecca or what had transpired that June morning. Diana held a memorial service for Rebecca at Lake Eola Park, attended by hundreds of community members, former teammates, and coaches who remembered the talented young athlete with so much promise. A bench was installed along the lake trail with a plaque bearing Rebecca's name and dates, creating a permanent memorial in the place where she had trained and ultimately lost her life. In the months following Rebecca's funeral, Diana became an advocate for improved safety measures in public parks and better security systems to protect vulnerable individuals. She worked with the Orlando Parks Department to install additional lighting and emergency call boxes around Lake Eola, ensuring better monitoring of the trail where her daughter had run every morning. Detective Vasquez remained in contact with Diana, having developed a deep respect for the mother's strength and determination. The case had been one of the most emotionally challenging of her career, the long delay between crime and resolution making the eventual discovery both satisfying and heartbreaking. The truth about Rebecca Carter's disappearance, hidden beneath Lake Eola's surface for 4 years, served as a chilling reminder that darkness could lurk in even the most beautiful and seemingly safe places. A promising young athlete's life had been stolen by a man whose obsession turned deadly, a man who ultimately could not live with what he had done. Diana Carter visits her daughter's memorial bench every morning, sitting where Rebecca used to stretch before her runs, watching the fountain spray water into the Florida sky. She tells visitors who stop to ask about the plaque that Rebecca loved this place, loved the challenge of pushing herself to be better, stronger, faster, and though her daughter's life ended tragically, Diana ensures that Rebecca's memory continues to inspire others to pursue their dreams while remaining vigilant about the dangers that sometimes hide in plain sight.